Prepare to experience the strongest radio allowable by law. Secrets will be revealed. Myths dispelled. From the studio gym where excuses never apply, it's Superhuman Radio with your host, Carl Lenore.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Superhuman Radio. Those of you who are just starting to tune in on YouTube, realize that I wasn't posting shows for about almost 2 weeks. And it's not because I wasn't producing shows. It's because YouTube is having a party with my older shows. They went back 3 years to find a medical misinformation show. And that is my second strike, they said. If I get one more strike, I will be deplatformed from YouTube. So I'm asking my audience, if you notice I've mysteriously disappeared from YouTube, chances are I'm still producing shows. The best way to keep up with me is go to the website superhumanradio.net, where the videos, we're hosting the videos now on Streamable, and podcasts are there. Also, we're on a variety of other platforms and we're expanding. We're going to start posting shows to Instagram. We're on Rumble. We're streaming live on Rumble. We're streaming live on Twitter. There are other ways to consume Superhuman Radio because I'm telling you that I am going to get kicked off of YouTube. It's just a matter of time. The thought police are after me. For them to go back 3 years in my catalog of shows and find one, and they told me that it was not only medical misinformation, but it was fraud. I committed fraud, and YouTube bounced me. I think I was down for 10 or 12 days. And they said, one more strike, and we're going to remove your channel. So I'm finding other alternatives to stream video to. Also, another great thing is to go to superhumanradio.net and sign up for our email list. You will not get emails about advertisements. I will only email you if we're removed from YouTube and to give you an idea of the upcoming shows. So if you do want to catch them, you can use one of the other platforms. But they have it in for me. There's no doubt about it. And, you know, I got over 3,000 shows in my catalog. So for them to go back 3 years, they're going to go back deeper, I predict, and they're going to find that additional strike and take me off the air. Of course, we have to thank our title sponsor. Without them, this show would be dead in the water because I'm the Rodney Dangerfield of health and fitness podcasting. I don't have the audience that Dr. Huberman has or any of these guys have. Granted, I've been doing this show for 17, soon in November, 18 years, but I'm not the hot and new guy to listen to, even though the stuff I talked about 6, 7, 8, 10 years ago is what they're talking about today. I just don't get the respect. So that's why I call myself the Rodney Dangerfield of health and fitness podcasting. But one person has stuck behind me forever, and that's Ron Penna when he was with Quest and now in Legendary. So they are our title sponsor. They make the show possible. Check out their new sweet rolls. If you're somebody who walked through the airport and says to yourself, man, if I could just have a Cinnabon one time and it wouldn't derail me, take me off of my nutritional tracks, I would do it. Now you can enjoy the sensation of eating a horrible product like a Cinnabon, but actually 1 gram of sugar, 20 grams of high quality dairy protein, and only 5 net carbs. They come in traditional cinnamon, which is kind of like the Cinnabon, but they also come in chocolate and wild berry. They're delicious. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary. Use the code SHR10, not only to save 10%, but to let them know that you learned about them through Superhuman Radio and reward them for spending the money to keep this show alive. And now, without further delay, I'll get my guest on, and he's a big fan favorite. We're already getting a lot of people, Dr. Mike Nelson and others saying Dan Garner is the man. I learned about him through my good friend Mark Bell, How you doing, Dan?
Good, buddy. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. So before we get into the discussion, you helped Mark prepare to run the Boston Marathon. He had never done a marathon before, but you were his coach, right?
Yes, sir. Yep. I did. I was involved for his training, nutrition, and supplementation leading up to that event.
Okay. But you've worked with a lot of other big name athletes, right? I mean, any names you can drop?
Yeah. I had John Rahm just win the Masters PGA tournament recently this year. Sean O'Malley, it just got announced yesterday that he's fighting for a world title on August 19th in Boston for the UFC bantamweight title. But I've worked with many Olympians, UFC, NFL, MLB, NHL, you name it. If there's like an acronym in pro sports, I've had an athlete at a high level in it. I've been doing this a long time.
How did you get into this, Dan?
I got into this as a 14-year-old in my garage. My dad went to a yard sale and brought home that classic York barbell set with the gold plates, the concrete on the inside. And I was a small kid and I wanted to get bigger and I wasn't blessed with great genetics. So then when I got into the gym, I didn't necessarily respond like some of my friends who would kind of just respond no matter what they did. So it forced me to learn more about it. And ever since then, man, I don't feel like I'm ever pushed to work. I'm pulled into it. I'm drawn. I've got a relentless curiosity and fascination about all things biology and biochemistry. And every time you think you understand the subject, there's always a corner to turn to where there's an entire new thing to learn. And I think it's so cool to be a part of something where you can spend your entire life learning and getting better and staying excited about it. So I guess it started with me having bad genetics and needing to learn a lot. But because I learned a lot, I had a lot of people start asking me questions. That translates into coaching. Results translates into working with bigger clients. And then ultimately you're on a big stage working with people for titles.
You know what's really amazing about this silo we live in? If you look back to guys like Jack LaLanne and Dan Lurie and, so many, Armin Tanny, the names go on. Dan, why am I going to forget his name? But when you look back at the fathers of physical culture, they provided one of the greatest gifts to human civilization that anyone could. They proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that what you eat will make your body look different. That simple concept will make your body lean and more muscular, gain muscle, gain fat. And that is something that is lost on the general population. And it's lost on the medical orthodoxy too. They just don't get it that, this idea you are what you eat is oversimplified and actually kind of makes fun of the idea that what you eat is how you look and how you live, whether you're healthy or not. That's the bottom line. More so than anything, more so than genetics, more so than the way you train. Isn't that true?
Oh, yeah, man. And it's like, I think a lot of people actually get hooked into the industry. Like I started in the industry as a personal trainer at Gold's Gym. That's how I kicked my career off. And nobody gets into personal training for the money. Like you get into it because you're broke for a long time. You get into it because you freaking love it so much. And like the first time you run a healthy diet, you have no idea how good the body's actually designed to feel. The way proper nutrition just brings your vibrations up to the next level. You have energy to go to work. You've got energy to train. Your ability to translate your thoughts into words is clearer. Your memory, recall, your sleep, your mood, these things all change. So the way in which I've always liked to communicate it to the athletes and clients that I've worked with is that calories are going to determine your body weight. Macronutrients are going to determine what you look like at that body weight. And micronutrients are going to determine how you feel at that body weight. Because our calorie energy balance will dictate our weight fluctuations kind of no matter what we eat. So laws of thermodynamics. But the macronutrient distribution of having the adequate amount of protein, having the right healthy fats, having carbohydrates as a proper fuel source, that is going to determine a lot what you look like at that weight, because 2,000 calories of pure sugar versus 2,000 calories of a well-balanced macronutrient ratio, those people look very differently. But lastly, we can't forget this last rung here of micronutrients determining how you feel at that body weight and look, because although you can be in a caloric deficit, you really shouldn't ever be in a nutrient deficit. Micronutrients are going to be the things that you're going to need to produce neurotransmitters, synthesize hormones, metabolize things out of the body. This is all going to contribute to that holistic approach that's going to make you the best version of yourself.
So there was a phenomenon about 15 years ago with the introduction of these new labs, like ZRT was the first one, Dr. David Zava, where you could actually order your own. They weren't doing blood work because they didn't want to send you to a phlebotomist. They wanted you to be able to do it at home. So they had blood spot testing and they had saliva testing. And for the first time, you didn't have to go to a doctor where he would order blood panels for you. Granted, you had to bear the cost yourself, but a lot of us were interested in knowing, especially those of us who were using drugs, like back in the day, the only way I knew underground lab test was bunk is did blood work after I started using it. It's like, oh, this isn't working. You knew right away. But that opened up a cottage industry of people who felt they understood how to read blood work. So when you do blood work, you do blood work for both health and you do performance. Talk about the flaws in epidemiological standards and using those to tell if a person is healthy or not.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome question and good kickoff point for us, because reference ranges are built upon the average population and population norms. But how healthy is the average person? The average person's in terrible health. Many people who are looking to do their blood work for the purposes of performance optimization, they're after things like mental performance, physical performance, fat loss, muscle gain, athletic outputs. But the majority of, or actually all of, reference ranges are built off of population norms, where the majority of the population is obese. The majority of the population eats like crap. The majority of the population is overly stressed. And then you have these reference ranges built on statistical bell curves to where you have this 95% reference range of a population norm that we use, and then the 2.5% on the outside are considered outliers. So this is our reference range, 95%. That is completely unacceptable and has led to a lot of misleading towards many markers in many different respects, like homocysteine. Let's just use this as one example. Homocysteine at 9.47, you are considered at a greater risk of cardiovascular outcomes, of cardiovascular disease outcomes. At 11.84, you're considered at greater risk of all-cause mortality. When your homocysteine is at 10, you're actually considered in the scientific literature to be in a state of hyperhomocystinemia. Hyper, lots of, homocystinemia, homocysteine in the blood. At 10, you are considered in a state of hyperhomocystinemia, which is associated with increased oxidative stress and hypertension risk. Once you hit 15 in homocysteine, you are at a significantly increased risk of cognitive decline, Alzheimer's, and B12 and folate deficiency. Yet, reference ranges regularly go up to 18. So it's absolutely freaking bizarre to me that that somebody who's a great person and a good guy, you could have one of the nicest guys in your neighborhood who coaches the kids' baseball team, but he's an accountant. So it's not his freaking job to be on top of all of the lab literature and the lab studies. And he could go order his blood work on this thing online and say, hey, nothing's flagged. I guess I'm good to go. But he could have actually tripped off cardiovascular risk, hypertension, oxidative stress, all-cause mortality, B12 folate deficiency, and Alzheimer's risk, and not even know it. Like, these things are absolutely crazy to me. It's why I think normal reference ranges need to be adjusted. They need to be adjusted to what would be considered optimal. And then the interpretation is where a true value comes in. So when you're asking me, to speak on reference ranges. There is the problem of the reference range in general. Okay.
Mhm.
But
Right.
even if that got corrected, the at-home blood work thing, there is a major problem of interpretation.
Right.
Because the value doesn't necessarily come from the lab. The value comes from the interpretation of the lab. And this isn't something that you can really do part-time. Labs aren't a recipe book to where this is high, I should take this. This is low, I should take this. You have to think when I've done over 1,000 blood panels. And over time, you begin to utilize the philosophy of, why did the body think this was a good idea? The biology is infinitely more wise than we give it credit for. It's answered questions we don't even know are questions yet. So when you're seeing patterns and relationships take place, there's this science of knowing what the physiology is that you're looking at, but then there is an art of interpreting it. So a good example here could be seen from albumin. Albumin's a negative acute phase reactant. So in states of oxidative stress, that actually pulls albumin down. If you are exposed to oxidative stress, albumin can be pulled down. However, albumin is very sensitive to dehydration, which actually pulls it back up. So you could actually have a stabilized albumin in a state of oxidative stress and dehydration, which is actually not very uncommon.
Right.
Not too uncommon
and not good.
Exactly.
So the labs will say, well, you're normal. You're in the normal range.
Good to go, right?
And this is the same discussion you and I just had off the air. The idea of looking at blood sugar levels without looking at insulin is false, because if your pancreas is at 95% duty cycle, in order to keep your blood sugar in the 80s, eventually it's going to crash, and you're not going to be able to sustain that, and your blood sugar is going to go through the roof. And doctors never pull insulin along with blood sugar, which is the same example. You may have low blood sugar, but you really aren't in good shape.
No, your acute glucose has nothing to do with what your body had to do to achieve that number.
Right.
And other things give a much more insightful outlooks. Things like adding in glycomark, fructosamine, insulin, C-peptide, hemoglobin A1C. These are all great inferences to create a larger picture about what's actually going on, as opposed to just acute fasting glucose, which can change on a daily basis.
Well, and hemoglobin A1C should be ignored, in my opinion. Here's why. Because metabolically broken people, so hemoglobin A1C operates under the premises that a red blood cell lasts 90 days. Right. But if you're metabolically broken, chances are your red blood cells aren't lasting 90 days. So let's just take a guy whose A1C is 5.5. Oh, he's great. But if his red blood cells are only lasting 30 days because he's metabolically broken, that's 5.5 at 30. If we let it go out to 90, it could be 16. So
right.
I say abandon A1C and start looking at other markers.
Well, hold on. Just let me add to that, because there's another art of blood interpretation to be had here. Bilirubin is a marker of hemolysis. So the rate at which you are going through your red blood cells, anywhere from 90 to 120 days. If bilirubin is elevated, it is a byproduct of red blood cell breakdown. If bilirubin is reduced, that's actually can occur, again, due to oxidative stress. Because a lot of people don't know bilirubin can be converted to something called biliverdin. And biliverdin is a fat-soluble antioxidant. So in that cool context that you just presented, somebody could have a normal HbA1c, but because of their metabolic unhealthy state, their bilirubin would have been pulled up because they're going through red blood cells at a faster rate. And this bilirubin is a byproduct of red blood cell breakdown. But because that person's also inflamed, it actually goes down because a lot of that bilirubin is being converted to biliverdin in order to act as a fat-soluble antioxidant. So again, reference ranges need to be cleaned up, but at the same time, there is an art to this game.
Yeah, there are reciprocating relationships between different things that give you a more granular picture of the patient. So creatine, homocysteine is I've read studies. I could be wrong. I'm asking you to correct me. So I've always thought that homocysteine was a byproduct of the ability of the body to produce its own creatine. It's spun off. So aside from B vitamins like B12, to kind of level homocysteine levels, would taking creatine, exogenous creatine supplementation, will that help homocysteine levels? And does it matter, since you're just doing something to reduce the reading and not the problem?
That's another. So that's kind of like when I said previously, why did the body think this is a good idea? What's actually happening underneath the surface here? Kind of like with C-reactive protein, inflammation's high. Should we take an anti-inflammatory, or should we ask the question, why is it actually high to begin with? There's a lot wiser ways to look at it, and that's why I always say it's not a recipe book approach. As far as creatine impacting homocysteine, that's not something I've actually done in the past. So that would be an interesting thing for me to explore and try. I work primarily with athletes who are almost always on creatine. So perhaps maybe that's why that hasn't come my way. My primary methods of being able to clear and methylate homocysteine have been B12, folate, and glutathione. Between those three, and just an improvement in systemic health, I've been successfully able to get it down.
So let's talk about iron. I started talking about iron 10 years ago when I had Dr. Michael Smith on, and we talked about a study that showed that the reason women catch up to men in heart attack rates post-menopause is because they stop bleeding. And iron overload affects women very quickly once they go through menopause. And there's lots of good studies out there. There's a couple broad population studies that show that people who donate blood twice a year, regardless of any other conditions, like they smoke cigarettes or they were diabetic, seem to live longer, 7% longer than people who never donate blood. And iron is rust in your body. It really is. I mean, when you think about it. So this ferritin is a protein produced by the liver, but not always in the face of higher iron. Like if you take high doses of vitamin C, ferritin goes up. And now ferritin, after COVID, people are saying that ferritin was elevated in people who were inflamed by the spike protein. So what's the right way to evaluate your iron? Is TIBC necessary? Is it ferritin exclusively necessary? What do you look at to determine if someone's iron is starting to climb?
Yeah, iron is such a tricky one, isn't it? Because it's sensitive to so many different things. You have serum iron, you have your binding proteins, you have transferrin saturation, you have ferritin, you have a lot of these circulating things around the same thing, but then they're also altered by different things. So you're looking at this situation and trying to adjust based on the art and science of what's going on. Typically, if someone has elevated ferritin, but they're going to have normal inflammatory markers, they may actually have a lot of stored iron that is absolutely associated to inflammation. There's fascinating studies that can also be a host protective mechanism. So what a lot of people miss is that ferritin is a representation of stored iron, but iron,
it's a question.
Exactly. Yeah. It is a growth factor for bacterial overgrowth. So it's actually been demonstrated that a host defensive mechanism is to store iron so as to not give internal bacterial infections access to the growth factor that would otherwise allow that colony to continue to survive and thrive. So if you see ferritin elevated, and then you see the neutrophil and lymphocyte ratio is greater than 3-to-1, you're actually seeing that the immune system is representative of an existing bacterial infection, and that the host defense mechanism is currently in place to sequester, store that iron, get it away so that the bacteria doesn't have access to it. So that is something that can absolutely throw ferritin off, that I've seen a bunch, because so many people are walking around chronically stressed, and so many of my athletes are chronically training. And this can impact gut health over time and leave people susceptible to infections like this.
So I've read 2 studies over the years that indicate iron overload can create idiopathic hyperinsulinemia. So you can have somebody that's like on a 0 carb diet. They're doing paleo or they're doing keto, but yet postprandial insulin just skyrockets and stays high for long periods of time. And they are almost always carrying around way too much iron in tissue. Have you seen this relationship between iron and insulin?
I actually have seen that. So I've seen that actually in athletes, drug-using athletes that I've worked with, who've kind of driven their iron up via drugs, and then their insulin goes up with it, even though they're not on insulin. So that's something, a correlation I've absolutely seen in-house at times. Elevated iron with elevated insulin over time.
I want to take our first commercial break. When we come back, I want to talk about what do you see as the most overlooked marker? Since all these geniuses out there are now positioning themselves like I can do blood work, I get a lot of money to read your blood work. I know that these people are using the same metrics that the medical orthodoxy does. You mentioned albumin. I think albumin is an important one, especially since the Horvath clock looks at albumin as a sign of aging. When you age, albumin dies, it drops down. In fact, I eat raw eggs purposefully because of the presence of albumin, and I've always been doing that. But let's talk about the most overlooked markers. Before we do that, if you want to be able to work with Dan, and this is for health or for performance, you can go to rapidhealthreport.com or connect with him at Dan Garner Nutrition on Instagram, at Dan Garner Nutrition. Reach out to him and see if he can help you. You may not be an athlete, but you may be someone who has performed well in athleticism, but you're getting older and things aren't working right. I'm telling you, the magic in reducing and reversing aging is in the blood. And quite often, it's not what you're not taking that you have to, it's what you remove from your body where the magic, reducing things and removing things. That's where the magic is. That's where aging well is. And here's a guy who knows how to read the blueprint of your blood. So check him out. We're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back with more Superhuman Radio. Stay tuned. Stay tuned. There are lots of concerns about food supply today. That's why you need White Oak Pastures. White Oak Pastures will deliver food right to your doorstep. You don't even have to go out and be disappointed by shopping in grocery stores. The finest beef, pork, lamb, duck, and more can be found at White Oak Pastures. And now they even have seafood. And best of all, White Oak Pastures has a negative carbon footprint, which means that you don't have to feel guilty for eating your ribeye. Go to shrnetwork.biz/white oak and use the code SUPERHUMAN to save 15% off. You went off the wagon big time at the end of the year, meeting all those family obligations and eating and drinking things that you usually don't. In order to start the year off right, you have to get back to square one. All that partying and stress depletes magnesium. Magnesium Breakthrough is more effective than any other magnesium on the market today to help you get your magnesium levels back to where they need to be. That's because Magnesium Breakthrough has 7 unique forms of magnesium. It's the new year, and if you want a new you need to replenish the magnesium in your body quickly. Go to shrnetwork.biz/magbreakthrough and use the code SHR10 for 10% off today. BPC is one of the most amazing supplements you can use. It's been shown to increase the speed of recovery, heal the gut, and do so many other things. BPC stands for Body Protection Compound, and it's a naturally occurring peptide in the body. Used by professional athletes and weekend warriors alike, there has always been an obstacle in the way of average people using BPC, and that is it was injectable only. Not any longer, thanks to Nutrineeds. We now have oral BPC, and it works. Go to shrnetwork.biz/Nutrineeds, NUTRANEEDS. Use the code SHR and save 10% off your bottle of BPC. Feel better, recover faster, train harder. Nutrineeds.
This is the Superhuman Channel, where brawn and brains finally meet.
Welcome back. Before we move forward, I got to plug Peptide Sciences, U.S.-made peptides. They're the peptides I use, shrnetwork.biz/peptides. Use the code SHR for 10% off. They've got everything, every peptide you could ever imagine right there. So check them out. So Dan, what's most overlooked when you literally look at 500 different markers, right? Not just in the blood, in the gut, in everything, right?
Yeah.
For your performance-based clients. What is the most overlooked marker or maybe misunderstood?
Yeah, in terms of overlooked and misunderstood, I'd probably stay in the world of blood. Even though I do blood, urine, saliva, stool, if we're going to call something overlooked, it means it's being overlooked constantly. And a lot of people are doing blood work, not as many people are doing urine, saliva, stool. So I would say the sodium to potassium ratio. That's one that's a real big one. And that's kind of like another component of labs. There's not just the markers, and there's not just the reference ranges, there's not just the optimal reference ranges, and there's not just the relationships between markers. You still have to consider the ratios and calculations and algorithms that you can create from all of those markers combined. There is a lot to unpack there, but the sodium to potassium ratio, it is one of the most evidence-based ways to actually look at someone's total stress load. So there are actual disease states such as Cushing's disease and Addison's disease that are representative of either hyperadrenalism or hypoadrenalism. That sodium to potassium ratio is the first thing that kicks that off. And here's how that works. You've got two adrenal glands. They're about the size of peanuts and they hang out on top of your kidneys. They are responsible for a lot of hormonal output, but one of the hormones that they secrete is called aldosterone. Aldosterone does a lot of cool things, but in the context of this conversation, it reabsorbs sodium from the kidneys because it's still good. It can get back into circulation and used, and it excretes potassium. So when a healthy amount of aldosterone is being released, it is stabilizing the homeostasis of the electrolytes within the blood by reabsorbing sodium and excreting potassium. When you begin to see the opposite, it is a representation of hypoadrenalism. So somebody who is actually beginning to enter a state of fatigue because you are able to look at electrolyte status, gain inferences on aldosterone without even measuring aldosterone, and utilizing that as an evidence-based metric to assess the stress load that this client has endured leading up to the date that they have come to see you. So what you're looking at from a more tactical perspective, if sodium is starting to dip below 140 and potassium is starting to dip higher than 4.5, you're going to have a lower sodium to potassium ratio. Typically, you want this ratio to be between 31 and 35. If it begins to get below that, you're representative of hypoadrenalism or underactivity. When it starts to get above that, you're actually in hyperactivity, which is the complete opposite. This is an extremely, extremely valuable metric because there isn't a thing you can't attach to stress. It's very, very, very impactful from a systemic health perspective to break this down for somebody. And it's also very impactful to recognize that electrolytes are extremely homeostatic to where the body does not want them to move. How many roles sodium and potassium play in the body, how important those roles are, and the fact that every single cell in the body has a sodium to potassium pump for optimal functioning. Your body does not want those out of certain set points. So when they start getting out of certain set points, it means some shit has been going down for quite a while. And it's probably the reason they hired me in the first place. They have undergone some form of stress. And I'm able to see this right away by looking at a couple of metrics that people constantly overlook, which is sodium to potassium. And when you look at
I've never paid attention to those ratios when I looked at my blood work. It's interesting.
It is very, very well established. It's one of the best things that you can look at to assess total stress load, and you can look at it immediately, and then things start to kind of make sense. So potassium, the reference range, by the way, regularly goes up to 5.3. Let's just get that out of the way. Potassium above a 4.5 is an independent risk factor for cardiovascular outcomes, and after 5 is an independent risk factor for all-cause outcomes. So you start to think, like, how can potassium be connected to cardiovascular outcomes and all-cause outcomes? But then when you draw from the idea that this is being connected to chronic stress and total stress load, it starts to actually make sense that an electrolyte can be associated to those things because that electrolyte is associated to the chronic stress that this person's come to you with.
And obviously overtraining can precipitate these changes in electrolytes. So I know I'm overtrained, and most days I feel I tell Elisa, I just feel tired from the neck up. Like I just feel exhausted, and I'm sleeping good, but I need I keep saying at some point I want to just go lay on a beach for like 3 weeks and revive myself. But,
I need that too.
Yeah, right. I think we all. But the thing I want to clarify, so the higher your potassium, the more indicative it is of high stress.
Yes. Yeah.
because it's interesting that most drugs prescribed for hypertension raise potassium, and by raising potassium, they dilate blood vessels better. And because I was going to say, well, so that's kind of counterintuitive. Like we're raising potassium, and it's dilating blood vessels, and it's supposed to be better for your heart, but to a point, that's true, right? If it's too high, potassium's too high, because too much potassium will stop the heart.
Yep. And remember the beginning of the podcast, right? Why was blood pressure high to begin with? Was it your chronic stress? Yeah. So we should have probably answered that question first, because we would have been able to pick that up in advance. A lot of these markers, a lot of ailments actually happen 10 years before they happen. Like you could go to Walmart right now and see a bunch of assholes there who have been eating like assholes for 10 years, and they still don't have diabetes.
Right.
They have pure Coke cans every single day, nothing but fast food. The body's unbelievably resilient. It really is. It's fascinating. But
especially when you're young, when you're in the reproductive age. Yeah.
Totally. Especially when you're young. That's a big thing we're talking about off air. But you're able to see these things in labs so much sooner, and you're able to act preventatively rather than reactively. And this sodium to potassium ratio is one of those things on that list.
What do you think about? So there's a book out. I did an interview with a gal probably 8 or 9 years ago called Caffeine Nation. And, our population consumes a lot of caffeine. Benjamin Franklin said caffeine was the greatest introduction to civilization because we could ignore daylight and nighttime. You could stay up and work through. But let's be honest, we know that ignoring or shifting the body's normal clock leads to all sorts of nefarious diseases, including cancers and so on. So how great was it? And today, there are 2 compounds found in just about everything. And one of them is caffeine. If somebody comes out with a supplement, but they want you to feel something, so you think it's working, they add caffeine to it. Talk about caffeine. Is it a troublemaker, or is it fine? People can keep you, because especially when you're talking about stress, isn't caffeine just like stress on demand?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, I kind of have a non-scientific answer to this one, honestly. Have you ever read The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson?
Sure.
You have? Yeah.
I haven't read the book, but I've remembered talking about it, yes.
Yeah. So he makes the argument that you can't give a fuck about everything. And I know that's blasphemous to say in our industry, but like caring about the exact meal frequency, the leucine threshold, the blue lights, the red lights, the sauna, the cold therapy, the resistance, the grip strength, the leg strength, all of the blood metrics, like there's so much to care about. In the context of caffeine, I haven't seen things be bad enough in my client's blood work or in my blood work, who I'm a regular high caffeine user. I have not seen things bad enough in blood work in order for me to add it to my give a fuck list. Now, I realize that's a very non-scientific answer, but I've got a lot of lab-based evidence to demonstrate that in the over 1,000 blood works that I've done in the people that I've done it with who are on caffeine. But at the same time,
what do you consider high caffeine use a day?
Oh, I over 300 milligrams per day. I think would be considered.
When I was training as a power lifter, I was doing 1,500 milligrams a day. And more recently, the reason I've had to give up caffeine is because it stopped working. I could do 2 energy drinks, a triple shot, a cup of coffee, and a couple, capsules of caffeine, which was like 2,000 milligrams a day, and it put me to sleep. And when I realized it stopped working, I thought, this isn't right. Something's wrong with me. So I've abused caffeine, and I think that reckless abuse of caffeine produced a different outcome for me. I really believe that caffeine, because it masked my ability, I was able to train even when I shouldn't have.
Yeah.
In the end. And I think that's why I am where I am right now, really.
Yeah. Caffeine definitely will do that to you. It'll mask the signals that your body is trying to send you. Yeah, like symptoms are nothing more than your body's only way to communicate with you that it needs help. And this is from all perspectives. So if you're very fatigued, masking that with caffeine is probably not wise because your body is trying to get you to recover. If you have acid reflux, masking that with antacids is probably not wise because you're not addressing it at the root cause problem. If you have high blood pressure, it's probably not wise to just take a blood pressure medication because you have to address why you had high blood pressure to begin with. A lot of these things are the only way in which our body has a cry for help for us to actually take notice and take action on it. I'm not a fan of symptom management in the short term. Blood pressure medication's great, saves lives. Caffeine can help you get through a workday if you got a project that needs to get done, or if you have a powerlifting competition coming up and you need to be a bad motherfucker during this time frame. That is something that we can do. Antacids, like if you're publicly speaking on a podcast and I had massive heartburn, that is going to help me in the show. I'm not against that, but I am against suppressing the signals of your body. And caffeine certainly can do that, and it'll certainly do that at the doses that you were taking it at. Maybe we had different perspectives because mine is 300
milligrams. I'm like, oh shit! If I would have just stayed there, I would have been fine. I did 300 milligrams of caffeine anhydrous as a pre-workout, and then I did 300 post-workout, and then I drank coffee the rest of the day. And and I've been doing this for like 25 fucking years now. And I really I jokingly say I did not burn the candle at both ends. I threw the candle in the fryer later,
just gone. All perspectives.
So AYG makes a good point. I did a show probably 12 years ago with a doctor from Rutgers. They looked at coffee intake and type 2 diabetes. What they did was they had two groups. One group drank decaf, and the other group drank decaf with the caffeine from the coffee re-entered because they didn't want to use caffeine anhydrous and muddy the waters. And what they discovered, in summary, was that the caffeine in coffee caused a greater release of glucagon and elevation of blood sugar in the absence of food. And when the next study came out, they used it in comparison with using drugs. I don't think they used metformin. I think back then it was something else. Glucophage. Was metformin called glucophage at one time? But maybe it was insulin. But what they found out was they were able to cut their type 2 diabetes medications in half when they eliminated coffee from the diet. So yes, there's no doubt about it. Caffeine and coffee play a role in blood sugar management. Have you seen that by any chance or no?
Yeah. I mean, it's going to give you energy. Energy requires energy mobilization. The body has those pathways that are going to be able to do that type of thing. But of long-term research on coffee, I have not seen anything to be very bad. And there's actually a lot of favorable research on long-term use of coffee. In terms of antioxidant capacity, in terms of weight management, appetite control. A lot of things are actually quite favorable for coffee. So I'm not against coffee at all. Fun fact, though, you're actually been told to not combine thyroid medication with coffee. And what's interesting there, what's interesting there is it's actually been demonstrated that the polyphenols are what reduce thyroid medication uptake and not the caffeine. So if you're somebody who wants to take caffeine in the morning with your morning dose of T4, T3, you can actually take it with a caffeine pill and not a coffee because it's been demonstrated that it was the polyphenols that impacted uptake and not the caffeine.
That's only if they both occupy the gut at the same time. If you take your caffeine later in the day, whether it's coffee.
Yeah, totally. The things that impact thyroid are really food, coffee, multivitamins, and antacids. Those really shouldn't be had within 4 hours of medication.
I want to take our last commercial break. And when we come back, I want to talk to you about this new trend where people are checking their DNA and comprising a diet. I just had this discussion with Elisa. There's a company out there that claims to do your DNA, and they tell you how much carbohydrates, how your macronutrients should be parsed, and also what vitamins and minerals you should be taking. And let's talk about that when we come back, okay? So Hey, this is Carl Lenore. I am the inventor of Gun Leash. Over 500,000 handguns are lost in the United States every year. If you carry a gun like I do, you are 300 times more likely to lose your gun. And 15% of those guns will end up in criminals' hands and used in the commission of a crime. Gun Leash solves that problem. Gun Leash is a patented, no-tracking proximity device the size of a postage stamp. It will alert you as soon as your gun is outside of your range, so you can never leave your gun behind. To learn more and to be notified when Gun Leash is available at the end of January, go to gunleash.com and get on our mailing list. Gun Leash. Never lose your gun, never leave your gun. Remember those rectangular toaster pastries you used to love when you were a kid? Well, Legendary Foods has just made them better. The new cake-style tasty pastry is like nothing you've ever had before. With 20 grams of high-quality protein and less than 1 gram of sugar, you'll feel like you're cheating, but you're not. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use the code SHR10 to save 10% off your purchase of tasty pastries. Now available in cookies and cream, red velvet cake, birthday cake, blueberry, strawberry, brown sugar cinnamon, and hot fudge sundae. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use code SHR10 today.
Dogs should be powered by fat and protein, not carbs. That's why Visionary Pet makes low-carb, ketogenic dog food for dogs of all breeds and life stages. From kibble to freeze-dried and even low-carb treats, all Visionary Pet recipes are very low-carb, ketogenic, and made with 100% real meat protein. Shop now and use code SHR for 20% off your first order today. Your dog deserves the lifelong benefits of optimal nutrition. Make the switch to Visionary and see why smart dogs eat low carb.
Spit that out right now. This is the Superhuman Channel.
Welcome back. Dan, what do you think about these precision nutrition advice based exclusively on DNA? Like there's one company out there now that they read your DNA and they tell you what percentage of carbohydrates should be in your macros and protein and fat. What are your thoughts on this?
I would not subscribe to that yet. I can likely see a future where that exists. But in terms of paying somebody to give you a DNA-based diet in the present day, that's not something I would support. I am a fan of standing on a mountain of literature. So that's why I love something like bloodwork. Bloodwork has been around for many decades, and there's a reason why you can get it in any city in the world. It doesn't matter if it's Hong Kong, Moscow, London, England, Toronto, LA, you can get a blood chemistry panel. And that's because it has so much scientific validity, so much reliability. And what's very underrated is actually the sophistication behind the specimen processing. The machines that actually process these specimens are very accurate and very reliable. And there's actually been research on a very popular gene company that everybody listening knows that actually had up to 50% false positives. 50 false positives. Like machine specimen processing really, really matters. And the fact that I can stand on 50 plus years of literature in combination with sophisticated machinery, my clients, you got to understand the situation to where I just got a NFL quarterback, one of the best in the entire league, signed a $160 million contract. You guys can do the math on that one. We just got him a couple weeks ago. I'm not going to go with a brand new fad. Okay. When there's this much money on the line and there's already a mountain of data that I can stand on and make truly evidence-based decisions from that I freaking know are going to improve his performance, that's the way in which I'm going to rock and roll. So when I take someone on, yes, I'm using over 500 biomarkers and I'm utilizing blood, urine, saliva, and stool. And then, this weird argument that people say, it's like, yeah, but genetics, like that's you, that's your genes. Wasn't it your blood? Wasn't it your urine? Wasn't it your stool? Wasn't it your saliva? This is still you, my man. It is everything about you, but with better literature behind it. So although I absolutely think that genes, they're not useless, and I think that in a big way, they'll be a part of the future, I currently do not use them in the present, despite my clients not having a budget to work with.
What about supplement recommendations based on genetics? You need more vitamin B in your diet or something like that. I mean, to me, it's silly. Looking at your genetics can give us a snapshot of what could potentially go wrong with you. But we know that there's a broad palette when it comes to what you, I mean, I think one of the greatest contributions that Dr. Sean Baker has given to nutrition is like, there is a vast array of things we can do, like eat only meat, and some people thrive. I mean, and it appears that regardless of your genetics, people do really well on a carnivore diet. Like, I just can't believe that, because genetics don't dictate the outcome of anything. I mean, BRCA gene, one twin gets breast cancer, the other one doesn't. I'm more interested in the one that didn't. What did she do? You know what I mean? It's like, I think we've invested way too much trust in genetics. What do you think?
I think that just because you have a gene, it doesn't mean you're expressing it. You know, and I'm going to see what we need to work on in your blood work anyways. So there's actually a paper on this. I believe it's called, the name of the paper is, Are We Missing the Low-Hanging Fruit in the Genomic Era? That's the name of the paper. You can find it on PubMed. And he's basically putting forth the argument that we are very fascinated about these functional medicine tests and these gene tests that are colorful, and you get a PDF with graphics on it and it looks beautiful, but still the most useful thing that we have is the black and white blood chemistry. It's like, are we missing the low-hanging fruit in this genomic era? And I absolutely think that we are, because we're creating, people forget that like new and improved almost always doesn't beat tried and proven.
Right.
Like, it's just like in strength training. Like there's a lot of that you see too. Basic movements are still around for a real reason. The basic concepts created by Vince Gironda, and you know, like these things are still around for a freaking reason, man. Like new and improved almost always doesn't beat tried and proven. And I just, with the amount of money on the line with the people that I'm working with, and the way in which I can authentically lay my head on the pillow at night and know I made the best decision possible for my client, I'm not rolling the dice on something brand new. And also with a very low amount of literature, like a gene study might demonstrate that X equals Y and you need this supplement in middle-aged Norwegians who are, you know, like it'll be in this one specific population. And yet these companies apply it to everybody because it's very marketable and nobody looks at the references anyways. So that's basically where I stand on it at this point.
One of the organs in the body which was appropriately named was the liver. It has the word live in it, and it plays a large role in our blood, its makeup, its ability to filter things out of it. What do you look at when you look at someone's liver panel?
AST, ALT, bilirubin, GGT, triglycerides. These are all things that can give insight towards liver damage, liver stress, gallbladder clearance, or fatty liver problems. Between those markers and the different calculations you can do, like the non-alcoholic fatty liver calculator, the fatty liver index calculator, your fibrosis score of liver scar tissue, these are all algorithms that utilize these markers to create score-based outcomes on evidence on where your liver is currently at. And that liver, yeah, man, it is a fascinating organ. You want to talk about something you can learn about for the rest of your life? Learn the liver. It's underrated, overlooked. It does so many amazing things. But something as common, you'd be amazed, by the way, if you look back at all your blood work and all your clients' blood work and family members, how many people are at risk of fatty liver. It's shocking. It is a significant percentage. And fatty liver has been demonstrated to be correlated with brain shrinkage. It actually inhibits both phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification. There's so many things that it creates a major issue with. Oxidative stress, a lot. And that's because the liver is associated to so many things. So if you get it unhealthy, then a lot of things begin to malfunction or operate inefficiently. But between AST, ALT, GGT, bilirubin, because bilirubin will back up if it can't be cleared. These are all excellent insights towards liver health. And there's actually a biomarker that people don't run anymore that was good, and people kind of just forgot about it, is serum bile acids. Serum bile acids will trip before ALT. So if you're somebody who, say, has a family history of liver issues,
Mhm.
or if you're running oral anabolics and you're trying to pick up and time, okay, when can I operate this dose? What about this dose? You're trying to time how much distress your liver can take in your current periodization for peaking. These things happen behind the scenes. Serum bile acids can actually be a trip off before ALT for what's going on with liver distress.
Interesting. Yeah, we've done shows about plasmapheresis and plasma dilution, and the liver is what makes 90% of plasma. The amino acids, the vitamins, the saline is filtered through the liver first before it's added to the blood. And we are learning now, because of various research studies, that the blood, when things are right with it, can actually make you younger. When we look at when they connected the old rodents to the young rodents, and the young rodents got old and the old rodents got young, we knew, like, oh man, like something about the blood. And so that's why I'm very fascinated with the liver, because the liver, I believe, is what starts to inhibit the phenotypical aging or promote it. And so get your liver right and you'll be a lot healthier and you'll live a lot longer. That's just a assumption that I've developed.
Yeah, our conversation this past Saturday, you were talking about your experiments in that area, and I think that stuff's fascinating, man. You're doing cool stuff.
Yeah, I'm trying to get a couple more things in line before I start.
Yeah.
But I've given up. I was a big fan of Anavar for a long time. Dr. Mauro Di Pasquale always told me that you didn't have to be afraid of Anavar. That even if you drank a little bit when you used it, it was pretty innocuous to the liver. And so I've always believed him. And so I regularly did 50 milligrams of Anavar a day for a few months, and then took off for a few months, and it's always served me well. I mean, I've never had real problematic liver labs done, but I'm off. I've stopped doing those, and I'm using lipospheric glutathione along with the NAC and plenty of selenium in my diet, and just want to help my liver function better before I start. What's that?
Any TUDCA?
No, TUDCA. No, I'm not. I've never really known about TUDCA. So you think that's really important, huh?
Yeah, based on literature, but also experience. TUDCA, typically it can be run year round for about 250 milligrams for beneficial liver health. But as you start getting deeper into, if somebody is in performance enhancing drugs, you typically physically do that to 500, 750, and then a peak dose of 1,000 milligrams during your peak dose in your cycle.
Okay.
It's something that's very good.
I've even lowered my testosterone, which is what's contributed to the iron. I'm going to start donating whole blood again also in this process to get I want to see how far I can get my iron down before it affects my performance. I have this theory, like, how much iron did we have when we were kids? You know what I mean? We were bouncing off the walls, and then all of a sudden there's no real consensus about iron. It's like, how much of it gets deposited into tissue? And once it's deposited into tissue, if you bring it down low enough, will the tissue then, by way of like osmosis, release it back into the blood because the blood wants it? And if that's the case, then there should be a therapeutic approach to reduce tissue iron levels. I actually called my doctor one day and said, can you do a punch biopsy on me? Like, I just want to see what my leg tissue looks like, my quad tissue. Like, let's see how much iron is actually in that tissue. He says he can't, but I'd love to find somebody who can.
Yeah.
Anyway, somebody just asked the question, what about tea, about caffeine? Tea has virtually no caffeine in it, like 18 milligrams a cup. I don't think that's a big deal. And then don't drink with TUDCA. Is that true?
I have never heard.
Preventive,
Yeah. I've never heard that to be an issue, and you could make the argument that it would be a positive thing. Yeah. So that one throws me for a loop, but I could happily be ignorant if I could learn something today. The only kind of drawback I've heard from TUDCA in the past is that it actually can, at high doses, lower HDL. So Yeah, so that's something that you just have to monitor.
A little, you know what? 250 milligrams of niacin a day straightens that right. Niacin is better than any statin drug in the world because it elevates HDL by reducing HDL receptors in the liver and reduces LDL by increasing LDL receptors. So it's the gold standard when comparing statin drugs is B6. It's simple.
It does a good job.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
You don't need to take mad amounts either. All right, look, this has been great. I'm glad we got you on the show. I'm sure we're going to do another show because I think I'm going to send you my blood work. I'm getting ready to do it, and I'd like to. And
well, Carl, I want you to send me a sweet roll. I saw the image on the screen. I saw the image of the cinnamon, the chocolate, the wild berry. I want one of those before I get your blood work, and then we'll talk.
Okay. I'll arrange that for sure. All right, look, Dan, thanks for being here today, brother. Thank you.
Thank you, dude.
And thanks for everybody who asked questions and was here with us. We'll see you next week with more Superhuman Radio. Take care.